Believe it or not, I'm still evaluating or processing the winter retreat. I had kind of an interesting one. Besides the Shakyamuni Buddha practice and Lamrim, I focused on the mindfulness of the body from the four establishments of mindfulness. For the past year, I've had some interesting body experiences, and I've been somewhat successful in using the Dharma to bring some equanimity each time something would arise, especially looking at the different occurrences through the lens of karma. That if these small sufferings ripened now and can prevent a bigger suffering in the future, I was pretty much up for that. But what I discovered is as much as I am better about not fighting against my illnesses and aging and things like this, my sense of self as this body is still playing a lot in the background most of the time. And as aging, sickness, and death become more probable as time goes on, I want to use the mindfulness of the body to loosen this grip that sees the body as I, me, I, and mine. What is this body that I think I am? Now, I had committed to this meditation before COVID-19 even showed itself. And now, of course, everybody's looking at bodies. Everybody's trying to keep it safe and healthy. And we're also seeing very clearly how fragile these bodies are. I mean, we're talking 800,000 people sick, 52,000 people have died just in our country alone. And so much effort to keep these bodies alive, and so little effort, like what, 2 weeks? A body can go from being somewhat healthy to dying because of this virus. So I tracked down the meditations on the body in volume 4 of the Library of Compassion and Wisdom called Following in the Buddha's Footsteps. And His Holiness addresses the relationship to the body from two extreme points. The first one is indulging in it, and as we look around, even though most businesses are pretty much closed down, there's a paragraph in this book where His Holiness says, most of the time we are involved with providing the body with comfort, pleasure, and care in one way or the other. Gyms, hair salons, nail salons, movie theaters, restaurants, beaches, furniture stores, sporting goods stores, spas, yoga studios, pharmacies, hospitals, cruise ships, grocery stores, to name a few. I mean, our whole economic system is based on taking care of these bodies in some form or another, to the point that we are willing to engage the activities to give the body pleasure regardless of the risk, which is kind of a wild thing that's unfolding right now. I want pleasure when the body is happy, all is well. That is the kind of thinking that we have. So that's one of the extremes, is just really using all of our time and energy of this life to take care of it, to indulge it, to give it pleasure. And on the other extreme, where we fight with it because it doesn't look like we want, or it continues to get sick and get old and get injured, we get pretty frustrated with it, sometimes to the point of self-hatred, self-loathing, which brings eating disorders, fad diets, manipulating parts, removing parts, changing the color of the parts of the body, just to make it do something that it just can't do. So His Holiness says somewhere between these two extremes, there can be a realistic relationship to the body, because we needed to practice the Dharma. We need to be able to benefit the world, and it's a wonderful vehicle in which to do that. Now, the Buddha knew these two extremes because as a prince, he really went from one extreme, which he had the worldly pleasures that any young man could possibly even imagine, to his ascetic practices where he starved his body in attempts to sort of eliminate, subdue the desires of the senses, almost to the point of taking his own life. Luckily for us and for all the world, that didn't happen. But instead, he figured out, the middle way of that, and he left a lot of teachings on how to look at the body, coming at it from a number of different angles. So in volume 4, His Holiness explains this one mindfulness called the mindfulness of the four elements, which states just as all material forms of this earth are composed of earth, water, fire, and air, so too is the body. And so what are we identifying with anyhow? Now, what was interesting is that part of my attraction to this meditation is my affinity and love of the natural world. That I've spent as much time as I can here at the Abbey, outside in the forest, the flower garden, being with the streams, the orchards, the meadows. And the Abbey is located way out in the country, very close to the earth. And since I was a child, I've always been aware of nature and have paid attention to its changeability, the coming and goings of things, ever since I was a little person. And since I noticed the elements in the natural world, when I looked at this meditation that His Holiness describes in the book, I thought, well, maybe that might work in terms of this body to help me dismantle my sense of self that I feel with this body and to see, how is it composed of the four elements? Because I get into a lot of anxiety when I look about its condition, and I want to be able to dismantle that. So I have a little bit of an explanation here of how I meditated on this. So His Holiness really unpacks this meditation really beautifully, starting with explaining that all material objects in our world are made of a combination of these four elements. And an object's properties are conditioned by them, whether it be a tornado, a virus, a car, a loaf of bread, a supernova, or a human body. These are all composed of these four elements. The earth element has a property of hardness, of solidity, of mass. Water is cohesion. It brings and kind of puts things together. It's moistening, it's flowing, it's wet. Fire is heat. Air is mobility, movement, and expansion. So these elements for each part of the body, to a larger or lesser degree, influence the characteristics of the body part and how it functions. So when the element of earth is weaker, things get soft like tissues and livers and organs. When things lack water, they don't stick together like bones and nails. You can't get your bones to, any cohesion whatsoever. If you were to put two bones together or two sets of nails together, they just don't stick together because there's not a lot of water element. If there's no fire, it's cold, so there's hypothermia, frostbite, the body struggling to get the heat generated. And if there isn't enough air, things compress, which is something like asthma, where there's just not a lot of air circulating in the lungs, and so you've got this tightness, this compression in the chest. So just to sit and retreat and examine and imagine the experience these body parts have as a combination of just these four elements. And it was quite an interesting experience. The more familiar I got to understand my body, then I began to recognize that all of this changing of these elements and their interrelationship to each other is going on moment by moment by moment in ways so subtle that we don't notice until we break a leg or we contract a virus. There's this continual subtle impermanence going on till something large manifests and we go, and then we notice. We don't notice until we notice. So, and I would try to get very still and focused on how do I experience these elements in my body and where am I in all of this moving around of all of these elements. There's so much going on. And when I got into about third, fourth, fifth week, I started to notice things that I don't generally notice. Like when I shave my head or I clip my nails. I don't hear them growing. We don't see them growing, but after a few days you go, I've got to shave my head or I've got to clip my nails. Or I had a big splinter in my finger, and one day I noticed it, the next day it was all inflamed, so I pulled it out, I washed it, I put some antibiotic on it, and and I didn't see it, I didn't hear it healing, but after about a week, I almost didn't know where the splinter had come from. So the body's doing this all the time while we're living and breathing and doing our thing. And so subtle impermanence is going on, and we don't even notice. And what are those elements doing in there anyway? So I found this in the beginning pretty unsettling because aging, disease, putting on weight, losing your hair, they're pretty subtle until, we don't notice until we notice. And through this examination, what ended up happening is that the more slowly and concentrated I thought about the body parts and how they related to each other and the earth elements, I felt more space in relationship to them, which I found to be kind of interesting, that the more I zoomed in and focused and visualized and imagined, the more open I felt, the more less personal it felt, the less I there was in the thought. And that no matter how the body is examined or identified or conceived as something permanent and who I am, It's made up of a combination of them. They're inseparable in the body, but yet they're very distinct because they have very distinct characteristics that help to describe how things function. And so His Holiness says, by attending to the elements composing the body, the perception of a person is lost. Now, I'm not a yogi, so I put in here, instead of the sense of the person is lost, I put loosened somewhat. And it becomes more apparent that the body is nothing more than a collection of 4 elements. And I could really see over the course of 4, 5, 6 weeks, even when I was in my room kind of not feeling great, that I could start to aware the more subtle components and how they were moving, how my body was responding. And the Buddha says there's nothing desirable in the body, nothing worth being attached to, nothing to grasp on as I or mine. And in the middle of all of this meditation, it was fascinating to watch how my mind wanted to make this body somebody, Semke, when in fact it was just some body. And what was, for this particular meditation on the body, I never found the body repugnant or unseemly. And this is where the Dharma is helpful, because at different stages of the path, we want our perspectives of our body to serve different purposes. To arouse enthusiasm for Dharma practice, we rejoice at having a human body. To strengthen our aspiration for liberation and awakening, we see the undesirability of it being caused by self-grasping ignorance, thinking the body is the self. And as we go along the path, to really understand that it's best to abandon the attachment to it because it keeps us bound in samsara. And then we care for the body in order to be of benefit to others. And for emptiness, meditation on the body to see the body for what it is. It's merely labeled, dependent upon parts, causes, and conditions, elements. So my conclusion on this is that it becomes a helpful tool for the path when life ends, to maybe have this thought when I'm dying that says, well, the body has been useful. It has helped me get around and be of service and practice the path. Because until we are free altogether from samsara and create the causes for the body of a Buddha, we can really see these bodies as coming in handy. They're like vehicles. Our minds travel around in them, and our minds are also transitory, changing moment by moment, lacking any self. And depending on this body that's changing moment by moment, this mind that's embodied in it, dependent on that, we throw a label on it, Semke, Peter, whatever. And that to be aware that this body is important for our practice, but not to be afraid of losing it or clinging to it in such a way that we suffer. And instead put some energy into creating the causes to have the form body of a Buddha, by practicing the method side of the path, so we can get a body that can emanate countless forms to benefit countless beings, is not made of flesh and bone, hair, kidneys, feces, snot, whatever, is not susceptible to aging, sickness, and death. I mean, I really got a little bit of energy behind that motivation to start thinking about, the causes for the form body of a Buddha, and it's certainly not this. Though how I practice in this body may be able to create the causes for the form body of the Buddha. So I found this meditation very helpful, and it also increased my appreciation for the Buddha's skillful means in helping us to be wise about these bodies of ours, what they're about and not about. And as time goes on, I think each of us all slowly discover the practices that resonate with us, the ones that we can put in our medicine chest to help transform our minds. And I am very happy to have found this one.